Well, thank you, Mike. Great, thank you for turning that on. My name's Roy Rogers. I'm a Washington County Commissioner, and I chair the R1 Act. Paul Savas, you can see his picture there. Paul is the vice chair, and this is a regular meeting of the Act. It's just a little different. We're dealing with some tolling issues, and so we agreed as the Act that we would have these special meetings, which is a little bit more burden for everybody, but thank you for doing it. It's going to be every other month. We'll be doing the tolling, and the other month we'll be doing the Act meetings. So I wanted to probably, should we introduce, because there's a lot of people we don't know. I mean, there's some folks that, one of our action items tonight is going to be to have appointments of what they call ex officio members, and that's, in my opinion, wonderful to see our friends from up north and get their perspective on things. So why don't we do that? Paul, why don't you just say hello? I can see you, and I've already kind of introduced you, but why don't we start with you, and then I'll just call people out.
Sure. Paul Savas, Clackamas County Commissioner.
Thank you. And then, Scott, I see you up there with your earphones on.
Sure. Thank you, Roy. Scott Kyler, Project Toll Team Facilitator.
Thank you, Scott. And then Garrett.
Yeah, Garrett Pryor, he, him pronouns, the toll policy manager for ODOT.
Travis, that does not look like you, but I will accept that it probably is. Say hello.
Travis Stovall, Mayor of Gresham. I think it looks like me.
Oh, I see you. You have it. You must be sitting out on the deck or something, because you have this kind of sunny.
The sun is catching me. I'm just right about my nose.
Yeah, I thought it was a mask at first, but okay. Good to see you, my friend. Phil?
Good to see you.
Yeah. You want to introduce yourself, Phil? Affectionately known as Dr. Philip Wu. But
yeah, sorry about that. I had to unmute myself.
Right.
Yeah, I'm a Phil Wu. I'm a community member of Region 1 Act, retired physician, and a member of the board of the Oregon Environmental Council, and a member of EMAC.
Yeah, that's right. Thanks, Phil. And Chris Warner from Portland.
Thank you, Chair. I'm Chris Warner. I'm Director of the Portland Bureau of Transportation.
Mary, please, Nolan.
Mary Nolan, Metro Counselor, and they, them pronouns.
Thank you. And Catherine, you're here on behalf of the Mayor of Vancouver, who I know, but I don't know you. So could you introduce yourself to the group?
Thank you. Yeah, Catherine Kelly, Policy Advisor with the City of Vancouver. And as you mentioned, Mayor McInerney Ogle sends her regrets. We actually have council meetings on Monday evenings. So that is something we'd like to put on the table for discussion as well.
Great, thank you. And then Temple Lentz, I don't know you as well. I see who you are from my cheat sheet, but would you introduce yourself?
Yeah, hi, I'm Temple Lentz. I serve on the Clark County Council up on the north side near Marion. Thank you.
Yeah, wonderful. Thank you. And Bob Hart.
Yeah, hello, Bob Hart, representing the Regional Transportation Council. I'm here on behalf of Matt Ransom, our Executive Director, who's stuck in Hawaii today. So.
Oh, man. Good place to be. And Nicole McDermott, please.
Yes, hi, thank you. Nicole McDermott. I am part of the Oregon Toll Team.
Thank you. Steve, that brings you up, Callaway.
So I'm Steve Callaway, and I'm stuck in another kind of paradise. I'm here in Hillsborough.
And Steve is the mayor of Hillsborough, as Travis is the mayor of Gresham. Andy Howe, please.
Hi, everyone. I am Andy Howe. I'm the transit director at the City of Sandy. I'm also the president of Oregon Transit Association.
Great, thanks, Andy. And Chris Ford, you might introduce yourself, because some of them may not know you.
Hi, I'm Chris Ford, the Policy and Development Manager for Region 1 ODOT. So just here to help out for a little bit, and just so I don't take up too much airspace, I mentioned, Roy, we do have a quorum of the Act tonight.
Wonderful, thank you, Chris. And Lucinda, I again apologize at the meeting today at noon. You guys had no time, and I thank you for, I already said that to Garrett, but would you introduce yourself?
Sure, Lucinda Broussard, Program Director for ODOT. No apologies necessary. Great conversation, richer discussion. Really interested in hearing what you guys come up with for equity.
Thank you. And Markley Drake, would Markley go ahead and introduce yourself?
You're talking to me. You kind of broke up there. I'm Mark.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah.
City Councilor, Happy Valley.
Good. Good to see you, Mark. And Gary Shirato, Mayor of Durham. Why don't you introduce yourself? Gary, you're not on.
Sorry, there we go. Thank you for reminding me. Gary Shirato, Mayor of Durham.
Thank you. And we got another mayor coming up, Mark Gamba.
Mark Gamba, Mayor of Milwaukee.
Thank you, Mark. And one of my colleagues, Jessica Vega Peterson, who looks like she may be running for another office, if I got the news right. And introduce yourself.
You're in the know, all right? Thank you. Jessica Vega Peterson, Multnomah County Commissioner for District 3.
Probably running for chair, so that was in the paper. That's great. Sumi, I don't know that we've met a lot, but would you introduce yourself?
Absolutely, sure. Transportation planner and project manager at HDR, and I'm the EJ representative on this committee.
Great, that's perfect. And Tamara, you got a great background there. Why don't you tell us where's that at? Is that Vancouver?
I'll give you a zillion guesses. No.
Vancouver.
Yeah. I have the privilege. Well, first off, I'll introduce myself. I'm Tamara Fuller. I'm the acting chair of our Greater Vancouver Chamber of Commerce. And that's kind of, I believe, my position here, kind of speaking on not on behalf of the Chamber or the board, but just be eyes and ears for our businesses. I do earn my living by being a commercial real estate broker. And behind me is the new in construction AC Marriott Hotel. And you're seeing the south side on the river where they're redoing the entire amphitheater down there to be garden patio. And this is adjacent to the brand new Terminal 1 that the Port of Vancouver has master planned.
Beautiful, that's great. Kristen, hi, can you introduce yourself?
Yes, hello everyone. I'm Kristen Leichner with Pride Disposal and Recycling, and I'm a business member on the ACT.
I think you're the president CEO nowadays, aren't you? Since your dad kind of gave you that title. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. And well deserved. You do great work. Ashton.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Ashton Simpson. I'm the executive director of Oregon Walks.
Perfect. Thank you, Ashton. And from our colleagues up to in Hood River, Jess, say hello and introduce yourself.
Yeah, my name is Jess Groves. I'm actually the port president for the Port of Cascade Locks and an ACT member for Hood River County.
Great. Thanks so much, Jess. Ryan, I think everybody knows you, but why don't you introduce yourself?
I'm Ryan Winsheimer. I'm the ODOT Region 1 manager.
Thank you. Carly, nice to see you again. Why don't you introduce yourself?
Hi, my name is Carly Francis. I am Ryan Winsheimer's counterpart in Southwest Washington. So I work for the Washington State Department of Transportation, and in my state, we call us regional administrators. So thanks for having us.
Well, thanks for being here. I appreciate it. And let's see, the next one, somehow, Tom, you good to see you. You saw you at noon. Tom Markgraf, why don't you introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Tom Markgraf. I'm with TriMet.
Thank you. And Nick Fazio.
Hi everyone, Nick Fazio, working on the Oregon Toll Project team, here to support with tech. So if you have any questions, please let me know. I'll go ahead and put my information down in the chat box. You can reach me by phone or email as well.
Thank you. These pictures are coming on and bouncing all around on me, but I think it's Ray. Would you introduce yourself?
Good evening, Ray Mabey, Interstate Bridge Replacement Program, Assistant Administrator.
Thank you. Ryan or Chris, would you promote, it looks like Mayor Snyder, he can't get in, so he'd like to be promoted. So if you could do that.
Nicole or Nick can do that. Please promote Mayor Snyder from the attendees. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you. Emily Wolf.
Hi, everyone. I'm also here with the program team, here to take notes for all of our meetings today and upcoming.
Thank you. I'm trying to get over to Bill, but people keep bumping in there. Hi, Bill, why don't you do it and I'll come back to Jason. So.
Are you talking to me?
Yep, Bill. Good to see you, my friend.
Good to see you. I'm Bill Merchant. I represent rural Clackamas County citizens. There's a lot of people who don't live inside the metro area, but everything that ODOT does in Region 1 affects us. So glad to be here.
Good to see you. He's on the act. Jason, you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. Jason Snyder, Mayor of Tigard.
Thank you, Jason. Pia, we can't see you, but we'd like to hear from you.
Can you hear me?
We can.
Oh, good evening, Pia Welch, a Portland Freight Committee member. My paying job is doing logistical planning for FedEx Express.
Thanks, Pia. She's a member of the ACT as well. I think I got in. Is there anybody I missed? I tried to, as I say, on my screen, they're bouncing around. They're coming in and, okay. Thank you, everyone, for doing that. Again, this will be facilitated tonight's discussion by the toll program committee. You saw several of those folks, and they introduced themselves. Our only real action is to elect ex officio members, and there's our friends from the north. We want to get them on this committee. If you're not speaking, please mute. We would appreciate that so we don't get a lot of feedback. And so I think we have everything as far as things that we need to talk about, other than we definitely will end at 7. I'm always prompt. Try to be, so I know you guys have a lot of things you need to do, and maybe it's just out enjoying that Vancouver waterfront. I don't know, but everybody has something they'd like to do tonight, so I want to make sure we get out on time. So I will turn it, Chris, over to who's we just talked about this about an hour and a half ago, but I didn't know specifically who's going to lead the project team in discussion. Who's doing that?
Well, my understanding is that Scott will help facilitate that, although send off to Lucinda. We do need to do a vote on ex officio members, though.
Yeah, you want to do that first before we get into the meeting? I suppose we should. If you have your programs or anything in front of you that's talking about this particular item, we're voting again on folks who are going to be ex officio. They're from Washington, and we certainly welcome. Carly is the regional administrator. She's introduced herself, and is not able to be here, Mayor of Vancouver, but she sent a representative, which is good. Temple, she introduced herself. Tamara introduced herself. Ben, did I miss Ben? Is he not here tonight? He's a board member of Greater Vancouver Chamber of Commerce. And then Matt was unable to be here, but he sent an alternate in his place. So what we need to do, these are folks who would be ex officio meeting, members of our group, and we, as I say, would like to welcome, and I would certainly, other than those people mentioned, like someone who's on the committee to make a motion to approve them.
I move that we approve these ex officio members.
Thank you, Bill.
I second.
Could I ask a question?
Sure. Let me take. Who was the second? Just was it Tom or was it Jessica?
Tom Markgraf.
Okay, Tom made the second. Okay, and Chris, you have a question.
Yeah. So are they only ex officio members for these every other meetings?
Yes. On the tolling. On the tolling.
Just on the tolling.
Right.
Okay. Just and so I mean we're not really voting on these, are we? I mean we're voting on them membership, but as a group we're not going to vote. So it's basically just so they can participate and be part of the group, but we don't plan on really voting on anything. Is that correct?
I think what you said is correct. What we're doing is saying that they can attend the meetings and participate in all discussion, and they're non-voting, but I, for one, really appreciate them being here. I think it's—
Oh yeah, I do too. I don't anticipate us voting much either from this subgroup, correct?
Right, Chris. That's a key point here. Everybody is an equal in this tolling group. There are no votes, so there's no reason to be concerned about that. I appreciate you bringing it up, but this is really just informational.
Yeah.
so I think that's an important point, but everyone has an equal voice at this in terms of trying to inform the discussion, ability to ask questions, and to get feedback from the tolling working group. So that's really the purpose of it.
Thank you, Ryan. Mary, did you have a point you want to make?
Mr. Chair, thanks. And I want to, it's similar to Chris's, so I won't ask that exact question. I just, first of all, want to thank ODOT for hearing that the Region 1 Act wanted to have deeper discussions about congestion pricing and tolling. And this is a very promising start to that. I welcome our friends from north of the Columbia to this conversation. We need to be in sync on this. And I appreciate the clarification that we won't be taking actual votes, and this Act Plus group will not make formal recommendations to the OTC. Is that right?
That's correct. Ryan, any change in that? No.
No, that's correct. This is just meant as a tolling forum, strictly for informational and educational and information sharing purposes. If the Act needs to take recommendation actions and whatnot, that would be at a future meeting at some point. But this is just a forum for conversation.
Great.
Great, thank you. And then I see Jessica. Did you have a point?
I was just going to clarify what Ryan just said, is that if we did have matters to vote on, we would, that came up in this meeting, we would take it to the ACT meeting and actually do the voting on those actions from there and make the recommendations from the official ACT. Is that correct?
That's my understanding, but Ryan, is that correct? You're nodding yes.
Yeah, we're not expecting to have any actions on tolling or tolling policy right now. Anything that would come up with that would be brought to probably all of the acts for some conversation and feedback, but we're not going to be voting or sending an official recommendation at this point. It's just conversation and feedback.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Jessica. I think did I get everybody who had a question? I hope I did. Before I call for the question, just so that everyone knows, the Act is comprised of 4 counties in Oregon. That's intuitive for all of you who are here from Oregon, but our Washington friends may not know that. It's Multnomah County and Washington and Clackamas and Hood River. So there's 4 counties. I don't know exactly the percentage. I've always been curious, but we're probably 30% or 35% of the state. It's most of the population, and bringing our good friends from Vancouver and Southern Washington, we comprise a large percentage of the population in the metropolitan area. And so I think that's very healthy. Any other questions? If not, I would call the question. All in favor of accepting these nominees for the ex officio membership, raise their hand, because we can't certainly hear all your votes. So, okay, if you take those down, is there any in opposition? I'm looking at 2 screens because there's a lot of us here. Okay, I don't see any. So I'm sorry. Okay, it looks like we're unanimous. So welcome aboard. We certainly are excited about your presence. So we've done that. So the toll group process, purpose, and logistics. There are some papers that you might want to take a peek at that I think have been distributed on the toll program, but I think the facilitators will jump right in. So Ryan, do you want to introduce that team again, or do you want Chris to do that?
Yeah, no, I don't think we need to do. I want to try to get into the conversation and make sure we have time for the conversation. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Lucinda Broussard to introduce her team, the facilitator, and what to expect moving forward.
Welcome, Lucinda. Good to see you. Yeah.
Good evening, and thank you all. Thank you all for joining, actually. So this is the Toll Working Group, Region 1 Act Plus. What we're expecting here is that we are going to talk about some deeper things in tolling, not just the projects. We'll give you an overview of the project, but we will not go deep. We're going to ask you for 2 of your top things you want to talk about tolling during this meeting. We kind of want to just have a work group. We want to get down to some of those nitty gritty questions that you always have that we never answer because we don't have enough time. So we have facilitator, Scott Keeler. Scott, do I see? I only have one part of the sheet. There's so many of us I can't see. I know he's here. Scott's going to be our facilitator. He'll walk us through kind of what tonight's goal is. And our goal tonight really is to hear what you guys want to talk about. And that's what we'll bring to each one of these. So it really is a working group. We expect it to be totally interactive and to take questions, comments, and just kind of learn from each other and actually provide some additional information. So Scott, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you, Lucinda, and thank you, Roy. Again, my name is Scott Kyler, and I'm pleased to facilitate the Region 1 Area Commission on Transportation Plus Toll Work Group. For this initial meeting, we'll discuss the meeting purpose and logistics, and then we will ask for your top 2 toll program questions, as Lucinda indicated. We'll then move on to toll program updates. Nick, could you please put your information in the chat box? And Nick Fazio will assist with any technical issues during tonight's meeting. In terms of the meeting purpose, tonight's meeting will have, if we could go one slide back, tonight's meeting purpose is threefold. First, we want to understand and agree on the toll work group's purpose and process moving ahead. Secondly, we're here to establish a forum, as was mentioned, to hear your questions about the toll program, to help set future agendas and provide answers for you. Finally, we'll update you on the current status of the Regional Mobility Pricing Project, I-205 Toll Project, and ongoing work of the Equity and Mobility Advisory Committee. So next is process and purpose. In summary, the toll work group's purpose is to hold facilitated discussions about the Oregon toll program toward a deeper collective and individual understanding. This is your opportunity to ask questions and receive information about the program, as indicated in a non-decision forum, but to help prepare you for actions from seats you may have on chartered committees. Our working agreement, the basis for participation and engagement within the group, is based on the Oregon Toll Program's equity framework. Remember to both take and make space for varied perspectives, be respectful, listen to others, and affirm their expertise. We want to hear from all of you. One of the first actions taken by the Equity and Mobility Advisory Committee was to establish an equity framework to inform how we do our work. This is changing the way we would normally do the environmental review process. The framework provides direction to ODOT to identify who, what, and where when using the term equity. The framework also helps define steps and ensure inclusion in our process and outcomes, including implementation and evaluation steps. This graphic describes the trauma-informed perspective within the equity framework. From this perspective, we acknowledge past injustice in implementing transportation improvements, reach out to underserved communities, and commit to working together going forward. This will help guide and influence toll program process and outcomes. For logistics, as was mentioned, the toll work group will meet bi-monthly, offset from the R1 Act meetings every other month. It is open to officials and stakeholders from the Region 1 Area Commission on Transportation and our friends at Southwest Washington by invitation. And ODOT will support the meetings with recording, facilitation, producing meeting summaries, etc. So I just want to thank you all in advance for your time and your contributions to the toll work group. And again, thanks for joining us. First question. Do you understand and agree with the purpose and process for the toll work group? And I appreciate the preamble we had just after introductions. Hopefully that helped describe the agreement and the understanding going forward. But let's pause here for any raised hand questions or in the chat box if we can. Yes, Catherine?
Hi, thank you. Yeah, I have a process question, and that is that Vancouver City Council meets on Monday evenings. And, you know, I think our elected representatives, especially Mayor McInerney-Ogle, would love to sit on this work group. So if there is a possibility of conversation of a potential different day and time for this meeting, she would appreciate that.
Yeah, we very much were made aware of this conflict. And before getting through this Q&A, Catherine, I wanted to raise the point, and maybe what we could do is have folks that may have conflicts with the Monday night timeframe. You certainly have a conflict, could identify that in the chat box or let us know as we proceed tonight. Thank you very much for making us aware. Others?
Paul Savas here. Understanding this is about tolling, will the scope of every meeting be a little bit different around tolling? For example, economic impacts, other topics around that, impacts on minority businesses and so on. Do we have a program, an idea of what will be next in the next coming months so we can actually prepare?
Thank you, Paul. Excellent question. You're going to help shape the program starting tonight. So think about your top 2 questions about the toll program, and we will use those to shape coming agendas. And so it's very important that we understand from the toll work group what you'd like to see and have addressed on future agendas. And we're almost to that in our next discussion tonight. Does that help? And Councillor Nolan, did you have a hand up?
Yes, thanks, Scott. Since the framework we just accepted explicitly says that there will be no votes out of this group, and yet you've just described that this group will help shape the implementation of tolls, what mechanism does ODOT intend to use to convey the sentiments of this group if we're not voting on things? Will the reports just be one person said this and another person said that? Or will the staff who are taking the notes assume where there's consensus without a vote?
Thank you. It's an excellent question. It is not a voting group. The toll work group will help form its own agenda on key topics. And I'll take a stab at this. And if Garrett or Lucinda want to jump in, really advisory in that capacity. And I think those that are part of the R1 Act, that are part of other chartered committees, JPAC, RTC, can take what they learn to help form their future votes and their understanding of the program. That would be my response. Garrett, did I miss anything?
No, I'd say Commissioner Nolan. So you, like Scott said, you will be taking votes, but at Metro Council or JPAC or the R1 Act. And so this, with a lot of times those agendas being so tight and having to cover information and then get to it, this is really a space to kind of provide you that background knowledge and let you explore a little bit deeper some of those questions. So when we do have votes that come through, one, you're going to get a greater heads up on it because you'll be here and you'll kind of see this as it goes along. And 2, you'll be able to kind of weed through some of those questions with us kind of beforehand instead of trying to do it kind of in the moment. I think that's our intent.
That's fabulous. And I really like the discussion. I raised the question particularly because I sat in on a joint meeting of the Rose Quarter project of the Executive Steering Committee and the Historic Albina Advisory Committee, where there was confusion because it was expressed that there weren't going to be any votes, and yet there was an informal sense of the group, which then later was characterized as if it had been a vote. So I think it's really important for us to be clear here about where those votes, if they come, happen.
Thank you for that insight. We appreciate that. Other hands up that we can.
There's a note in chat before Director Warner, there is a note. Was there ever a survey poll to invite the citizen in the affected areas to get their input?
Excellent question.
Can I ask who asked the question? Lori Miller? Laura Lee? Don't know where that question came from. We'll answer that one.
And I think we're getting, Lucinda, these are questions from attendees. And so we do have a public comment period at the end of the meeting that we can get to.
I should have probably said that at the beginning of the meeting. There will be a public comment period at the end of the meeting.
Thank you for that. Ashton, did you have your hand up?
Yeah, so in tonight's presentation, we have an equity framework and a trauma-informed perspective, both of which speak to communities more often than not than the communities that are impacted. Will there be representation from Vancouver community-based organizations on this work group? I mean, Oregon community-based organizations are part of this, and I'm talking to my community, so I'm assuming that communities in Vancouver who experience the same things we experience here in East Portland would like to sit at this table too.
Excellent comment. Garrett, do we have this covered? Do we have room for this question? Ashton asked a great question about inclusion.
I'll definitely highlight, we do have those groups on our Equity and Mobility Advisory Committee. We've got a few representatives from community organizations, one from the health organization up in the Clark County area. But I think you raise a good question about this group going forward, if there's room for additional there. So let's take that back home and talk about, who's represented and where that might be, where that could be added to fill in a gap.
If I could just add to that, Garrett, that's a great question. There's a lot of folks. Obviously, we can't reach everybody and have them all be ex officio on this act, but the tolling group is out talking to a whole range of organizations outside of this forum as well. So I don't want you to think that it's exclusive to this group or only this group's getting feedback. And the hope is that you're all taking this information back to your boards, commissions, stakeholder groups, organizations within your communities, and both sharing information you've learned here, but also bringing back those questions. So if you do have certain interaction with another group and they have questions, certainly bringing those either here or forwarding them on to Lucinda and Garrett and their team, they'd be happy to get out there and meet with those groups as well.
And thanks so much for raising that, Ashton. Do we have are there other questions or clarifications, Lucinda? On mute.
Chris Warner had a question previously.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, no, I thank you, Lucinda. So this is just something I wanted to flag, and as we're kind of talking about the broader discussion in terms of clarifying how this group interacts with JPAC and how, because there's so many representatives that are on each side. So the question is in terms of what decisions or what recommendations are being made, and how do we kind of keep it straight? I think it's something we need to keep in mind as we're moving forward, because there seems to be, I just don't want to have a bunch of different groups making different recommendations, and we're on all these different committees, and how do we reconcile all of those discussions?
I think what we're trying to do here is give some foundation. So when you are at a table where you need to make a decision, you don't have those ground questions about how something works, that we've already discussed that here. So not the recommendation of what it may be, but some of the things that may come into play for how you make that decision and what information you may need to do that.
Thank you for that question and clarification. So I don't see another chatter hand. I'll pause for one moment. And then if we can, by exception, just the understanding and agreement on the purpose and the process for the toll work group. Any further kind of concerns to talk through here?
I want to follow up behind Director Warner. Once these decisions or our conversations have been solidified in some type of document, how do we translate that information over so community can get involved and understand this process?
So we'll post the questions, responses on our website as we do with everything else we do here. So it's not just in this room. In this room would be whatever the top 2 questions each person may have that we may focus on, but we'll provide that out to the public.
Thanks for that follow-up, Ashton. Paul, you have a hand up?
Yeah. Thank you. It seems like we spent a lot of time talking about the fact that we're not going to be making decisions. Maybe it might be a good idea for someone to tell us who is making the decision, which I believe is what the Oregon Transportation Commission and the legislature have made this decision. It might be a good idea to put that on the table so we can just get that covered.
So the legislation of 2017 established the Oregon Transportation Commission as the toll authority for Oregon. So that is where we're stepping from. The Oregon Transportation Commission, being the toll authority, is actually the authority for all the tolls. What we're trying to do is make sure that we have information provided to everyone about how tolls work. So if we're talking about toll rates, how are toll rates established? Not what they are, which would be what the OTC does, but how does that happen? What information is used? How do we gather that? So we're trying to give some background, fundamental information. We are not in any way trying to take anything to the OTC or garner anything from this that goes to the OTC, as much as we are trying to set up some foundational information where everybody understands what tolls is, right? So we all have the same kind of common understanding about congestion pricing, tolls, what we're calling it, why we call it that, how it works, the technology we may use. Just some real, I don't know if they're basic questions, but it's so we're not all in different fields. We all are kind of in that toll field, and we understand what kind of the process we're using to go forward. Does that help, Commissioner Salvis?
Yes, it does, Lucinda. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
And thanks you all. Just glancing at the clock, I'm ready to move on with the toll sort of question mapping. Any other kind of concerns about agreements moving forward from here?
I want to make a point, and I've made this at various tables. When we talk in terms of who's involved and what the community is, that's a very confusing question because the road that we're talking about, the highway we're talking about, is a federal highway. So it's owned by people in New York, people in Tennessee, people in Texas, people in California. And we're tolling a particular aspect, or talking about a particular aspect. And talking to our members of the Oregon delegation, I've not done that to Washington, we're proposing that we put certain parameters on who gets tolled, who doesn't, how it all works. And I think that at some point in this process, we need to say, what's the community? It's not strictly, with all due respect to everyone, Multnomah County or Clackamas County. Our friends in Seattle are just as impacted. And as we look at the community, if you talk with Peter DeFazio out of Eugene, he would say, well, my folks in Springfield and Eugene and all points south are impacted by this. So I think it's important that we define what is this community, because we can make lots of decisions. ODOT can make certain decisions, but quite frankly, without any money from the federal government, there's not much that can happen here. And so I think our involvement, at least in terms of discussing community, has to be federal delegations as well, because it's really important that we don't get into a match or fight about somebody from California say, well, why is my folk coming up from here, going to Seattle, getting charged tolls when I already own the highway? And so when I get to the next question that you're going to pose, I have some very specific things, but community is a very tricky definition. I just wanted to point that out.
Thank you for making that point, Roy. I think we should go ahead and move on with the toll questions mapping. And I'd like for everyone to have an opportunity to share really your top 2 questions. And these relate to what you want to discuss at the toll work group. And remember, we're trying to move forward to form agendas and get these on the floor. So please speak up or place your concerns in the chat. Do we have a hand? Is Sumi?
Yes. One question that I have is, and I don't think this has been clearly defined, but how does the project define corridors? And that would be the first question. How are corridors defined? And then second to that, related to that, is how does that definition relate to mitigations that are developed for the project, such as multimodal mitigations, specifically transit? So those are 2 questions that are top of mind for me.
So to reiterate, the definition of corridors, how those might be mitigated, and then the question on transit.
Well, the definition of corridors, what is the definition of corridors? How does the project define them? And then second, how does that definition relate to mitigations, including transit?
Okay. Thank you so much. We'll just record these for now to keep things moving. Next, top 2 questions. Thanks, Sumi. We have a hand up or a chat.
So Scott, I think we've got Roy Rogers. Roy, you have questions you want to go with?
Sure, a couple of them that I think are important to establish as a baseline. Just a little context, Paul Savas and I served on tolling committees before this was ever even occurring, this effort by both Metro and ODOT. And the baseline question that I've asked of our commissioner, I posed to our commission, is how does this benefit Washington County? We're regionalists and believe in the system, but if the tolls are going to not be specifically delegated to I-5 and the Abernathy Bridge, we begin to say that it doesn't have a lot of benefit to us. As we run our Nike folks out to the airport, our Intel, they're watching too and saying what benefit. When I talked to the chair of the Clark County Commission, who I've met years ago, she's saying, what benefit is it? And I don't know if she's still the chair, but she was saying, what benefit is it to Clark County if there isn't specific cost to improving the highway? Then what's the benefit? So my question is, not to be parochial, because I've never been out on JPAC, I've never been in transit or anything else, but you're going to have to show us what the benefit is of the tolling program. So that's question one. And on our broader community, for our friends in Hood River, our friends in Marion County, our friends in Point South and the Point North, I won't name all of their communities, but what's their benefit? And as you put in the equity provisions, which we all agree need to be there, how are their low income, their disadvantaged groups, how are they benefiting? Are they getting a toll just simply because they don't live in the immediate region? So these are questions that the federal delegation is going to answer or have to be asked. And so we need to define those 2 issues. What's the benefit to all of us? Because that's how we built the whole program with Metro and JPAC, is that everybody's boat rises. So how does that work? And secondly, as we look at the broader community, what benefits are to them and what costs to them? And so that their delegations, if it's up in Washington or if it's Point South of us or for Earl Blumenauer or Kurt Schrader or any of them, how does he explain that his folks are paying, but maybe the benefits are not there for them? I think it's some base questions that need to be asked. So that's mine.
Appreciate that, Roy. Good questions of regional perspective and benefit. Bill Merchant, you had your hand up. Do you have top 2?
Sure. I wanted to, first off, I agree with Roy completely. We have to show people what is the benefit of doing all this stuff. For Clackamas County, most of 205 is in Clackamas County. I think all of 205 is in Clackamas County until you get right up close to the border. And so tolling on 205 has a big impact on Clackamas County and what it's doing there. Now, I know the guys over in Washington County go to Clackamas County to go to the airport, like Roy mentioned. So there's traffic back and forth all over the place. But we need to figure out how to show the people who live on the west side of the Willamette what's the benefit to the east side of the Willamette and vice versa, because the Willamette is sort of a dividing line that goes right up through the middle of the whole place. And we need to show that the benefits are equal for both groups. They're not groups, they're just people that living out there, and they all want to know that this is something for me, that I'm not paying for something that I'm not ever going to use. Why are you charging me for stuff that is, for somebody else's benefit? We have to come up with good reasons why the farmers in rural Clackamas County need to support this and agree to it, because otherwise everybody's going to be angry that it's not happening for them. So,
thank you, Bill. More questions on benefit. I appreciate those. Mayor Shirado.
Oh, and Scott.
Yes.
Sorry, I want to make sure that we get to some questions that we have in the chat box as well. But before we do, I see that there's a couple comments and questions coming in from public attendees. I want to thank them for their comments, let them know that we are recording those questions and comments as well. This is a working group for the R1 Act plus toll work group. And so we want to make sure that they are given the opportunity to get their questions out in the air. And I do want to just let everybody know that there will be a public comment period at the end of this meeting also. So from Mayor Schneider, we have a question: how exactly does ODOT plan to mitigate and or minimize diversion, particularly I-205 from West Lynn to I-5 and to I-5 from Wilsonville to Capitol Highway? And then a second question from Mayor Schneider: what is the ODOT OTC communications plan for the general public to avoid complete mutiny and revolt among the general public for a tolling congestion pricing scheme that by all measures appears wildly unpopular? And then we also have a question from Chris Warner: how can congestion pricing help to advance our state and regional greenhouse gas reduction goals?
Thank you, Nick. Thanks for the reminder to the public, and thank you, Chris and Mayor Schneider, for the good comments and questions. We'll keep recording these, and if Mayor Shirado could go next. On mute. Mayor Shirado, you're on mute.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes, thank you.
Thank you. I have one question, and it's generally along the line of all of the questions that I've heard up to this point. I'm asking this because my career has been in sales and sales management. And one of the things that you learn very early on is your elevator speech. And that's where you're given about anywhere from 3 to 10 seconds in order to tell somebody on an elevator ride what the advantages and benefits of something are for them. And while we can frame our questions in umbrellas and involve a great number of nuances, if I have to come up to the man on the street and he says, what the hell is this going to do for me? I've got about 10 seconds in order to tell him before the light changes and he crosses, in order to get my message through to him, enough to make that person begin to think positively, hopefully, about what the tolling does. So my question is not so much how are we going to do it? What is that elevator speech that we can come up with that we can take to anybody, anywhere, on any impromptu time frame and give them the most succinct answer we can as to what the features, the advantages, and the benefits of the tolling program would be? Thank you.
Thank you. Very good. Jessica, could you go next?
Sure. So the two questions I have, one, you know, ODOT has been using tolling and congestion pricing fairly interchangeably, but many people consider these to be two fairly significant and two significant differences between the two phrases. So as we're talking about what tolling is going to look like for our region, you know, how are we going to have that conversation about deciding what's the primary purpose of tolling implementation for our region? Is it reducing traffic? Is it paying for projects? Is it trying to fight climate change and getting people off their cars, right? So I think that that's important as we're having this conversations to really have an understanding and a shared understanding of what is our primary objective in putting this kind of program into place here. The other question that I have is, you know, how are we going to be working with some of our partners whose commitments we need to make sure that that tolling is successful and doesn't have negative impacts on disproportionately impacted communities for whatever programs we put in place. You know, I'm thinking back to that original group that was talking about value pricing that some of us were on, you know, transit and making sure that there were transit options for people. Any place we implemented congestion pricing was going to be key to making sure that there were options for people, that there wasn't inequitable access. And so how are we going to get commitments from partners you know, who are going to need to put investments, those kinds of investments in place to make sure that this project is successful and doesn't have those negative impacts.
Thank you, Jessica. I'm going to call on Temple next and then come back to Mary, and we'll go to Mayor Gamba. And we'll probably try to wrap this part up. We're a little behind on the agenda in 5 minutes. Temple?
Thank you. And it's a little bit echoing Commissioner Vega-Peterson's comment. And also, I agree with the question about what are the benefits. We need to be able to articulate those. And specifically, if we're talking about tolling in general, there's always the need for other modes to get people around. But specifically with congestion pricing, if one of the things that we are encouraging people to take is transit, then what are the ways that we are going to ensure that there is a robust and continually enhanced transit program to help support folks who are taking these different options? Thank you.
Thank you, Temple. We've got plenty rolling up for the next few agendas. I believe, Mary, we're going to have your two questions next.
Okay. Thanks, Scott. I represent a council that prioritizes climate stewardship across all the services we provide and all the planning that we do, and that certainly accrues to transportation as well. So for Metro, we recommend and would urge ODOT to apply for tolling authority under the value pricing section of federal programs. And the reason for that is multiple, but the question is, I think we need a discussion around that particular issue, whether ODOT applies under the value pricing program or under section 129. And those, I'll just be brief, the value of, from our perspective, consistent with land use planning and climate stewardship, is that the value pricing program allows for flexibility, including tolling before a project is built as a mechanism to manage demand, both total volume and time of day, which we believe will meet a mitigation of congestion while reducing the peak volume, therefore reducing the need for additional lanes or auxiliary lanes. So the question for the agenda at a future meeting is, how does ODOT make a recommendation for which federal program to apply for authority to toll under? That's the first question. And the second is also allowable under the value pricing mechanism, the flexibility to invest the revenues from tolling into more than just debt repayment for the construction bonds, and to invest it in transit, in efforts to minimize diversion of traffic onto surface streets, and all that flexibility. So the question for the group discussion is, what are the priorities for using the revenues that will be collected through tolling to make sure that we are meeting, at least on the Oregon side for our Washington friends, Oregon statewide land use requirements, as well as Oregon state climate requirements, since transportation is such a significant contributor.
Thank you so much for those thoughtful questions. Mayor Gambo, you'll be our last input on this topic, just so we can move on the agenda, please. I'm sorry about that. Bill Avison will maybe take the chat box for any comment.
All right. So in my view, congestion pricing, if it's done properly, creates transportation options which reduce congestion.
Bingo.
They create equitable options for low-income people, and they reduce climate impact. How does ODOT propose to achieve that? So that's one question. The other question is, what measures will be taken to avoid diversion to the cities that are going to experience it?
Great questions. We'll take other toll work group members, top two in the chat box. We want to hear from y'all, but we do have to save time, 10 minutes for the public, and move on our agenda. So next, I'd like to hand it over to Garrett and Lucinda to give you the toll project updates.
Yeah, definitely. And do you mind making that full screen? Yep. So I'm going to walk through just about 10 minutes here on kind of the toll program project updates and updates on the toll program. So like we've been talking about before, how did we get here? 2017, HB 2017, Keep Oregon Moving, passed and kind of directs some of the core projects, which I'll talk about here in a second, and gives us the direction to toll and to look into that here in the Portland metro area. And then just recently in these last few months, House Bill 3055 was passed, which in addition to some other things, allows for the financial flexibility within ODOT to help deliver these core projects, which I'm going to show a map of here in just a second. Next slide. And so the challenge that you all know, probably being in this world as well, is we see that traffic is back to where it was pre-COVID levels. That's what you see here on the left side of the screen, showing those transportation levels are back and congestion is back. And we know how just behind housing, that transportation is a real cost stressor with the widening wealth gap in America. And we've seen how these two forces, housing and transportation, has really reshaped our region and really pushed people to the edges for housing where the transportation options are the least. And so as a part of the Urban Mobility Office of ODOT, this is our charge, looking at the biggest problems and questions of our day and what can we do with transportation to address that. Inequity, climate change, congestion, safety, and tolling really comes here in this reliable funding piece. It moves us from a maintain and survive to hopefully a more thriving and innovative transportation system. Next slide. And so the core projects that I was referring to there that we're working on as far as this coordinated urban mobility strategy, starting in the north is the interstate bridge replacement, heading south, the I-5 Rose Corridor improvements, further south, the OR 217 auxiliary lanes, down there at the bottom of the Portland Metro with the I-5 Boom Bridge and seismic improvements, and then traveling up I-5 for the I-205 improvements project. And so in the background of that, you see is the dark blue. That's the largest footprint that could be studied for tolling in this regional mobility pricing project, which you'll hear about a little bit more here in a second. And it kind of shows you that tolling or congestion pricing is really the backbone for this financial effort here and coordinated strategy within the region. Next slide. So what is the toll rate going to be? That's the kind of main orienting question. As you can see here, that green part in the middle, where it will land is really going to be a balance of managing congestion and generating revenue. And that's in that explicit direction out of that HB 2017 language. And so really that's where we're at now. It's going to take us a few years to get through the environmental review process and then the toll rate setting to figure out where that will land. Next slide. And so to a comment we had here before, what are these terms, tolling, congestion pricing? The way ODOT we're defining it, we really see the type of work that we're doing here. We are using tolls to implement it, but it is congestion pricing. That there will be higher prices on areas where there's higher congestion, and there will be low or no price where you see little or no congestion on the roads. Next slide. And so quickly, just to kind of set a base floor, here are our top 5 questions on tolling. Next slide. How will it work? It'll be a modern system, no coin booths anymore. It'll pick you up by your transponder in your car or take a picture of your license plate. So there's no stopping. You move through and free on the road. Next slide. You will know the price before you get on the road. So this is not a dynamic congestion pricing system, meaning where the prices change per the time of day, if there's more or less traffic there. It'll be a set variable rate schedule, and it'll follow that congestion pricing like we talked about before at the higher prices, at the higher areas and times of congestion. Next slide. The benefits, to Mayor Sherrato, our first pitch would be it's the travel time. It's saving time, getting you to home quicker and more reliably to pick up your kids from daycare, or if you're a local business, shipping your goods or moving your goods through the region. So improved travel time and reliability. We also know it's essential to meeting our climate goals and reducing greenhouse gas emissions and fuel consumption. It's sustainability for funding investments. And we also we know from, and we'll talk about it more here in a second, but investments to advance equity. Next slide. And so what you'll see here is, like we talked about, those urban mobility office core improvements projects. That's a part of what will be paid for. But what we've heard from the value pricing feasibility analysis, which some of you were a part of, and then subsequently for the Oregon Transportation Commission, that to equitably do tolling, we're going to need to have investments in transit and multimodal transportation options. We're going to need to address the impact of diversion that could be created by tolling and that impact on neighborhood health and safety, and that there needs to be affordable options for people experiencing low income. And one of the pieces of legislation that just passed, the HB 3055, said by next September, ODOT will have to report back on how we're going to do an equitable income-based toll rate as a part of the program. Next slide. So when will it start? There's 2 toll projects we'll talk about here in a second. There's the I-205 toll project. That's about a year ahead in its environmental review process, as you can see here on the screen. And so that will be wrapping up or completing the environmental review late 2022. And then there's about a year to year and a half of toll rate setting process that has to occur after that. And so the earliest that would begin is the very latest part of 2024. Whereas that larger blue footprint, the Regional Mobility Pricing Project, that's really kicking off its environmental review process. It's going to officially start next year. And so that's going to be studied through 2024. So the earliest it could start would then be that year to year and a half after 2024, because it would also have to go through a toll rate setting process. Next slide. So I'm just going to highlight a few of the key project updates. Like I said here before, the Regional Mobility Pricing Project has kind of that, it does still have that dual goal of managing congestion and raising revenue, but through the direction of ODOT and the Urban Mobility Office also is oriented towards meeting the goals here you see on the screen. And so again, just back here on the map, that's the teal area. And then that you see, and any part of the I-205 project that's not specifically studied will then also be picked up in this regional study of tolls as well. Next slide. So just to look at a more specifically, I'll include this. I won't go too much in depth to it, but there's a document we can send if we haven't sent it already, but it kind of lines up not just all of those core projects that I listed out, plus the tolling projects, how do they line up in the planning and construction and implementation phase? So this is a little snapshot of that here for the Regional Mobility Pricing Project. Next slide. And so one of the key pieces of information, we have it out for public comment now. We would love to hear your detailed feedback on it. Some of your agencies have or organizations have given us some feedback, but it is the purpose and need statement that's we're kind of looking to set in place early next spring, so then we can begin that more detailed kind of alternatives analysis. And so we're doing the whole range of things to meetings like this, to briefings at cities, counties, business groups, neighborhood associations, going out to farmers markets. We're trying to hit the whole range of folks to really get this project set up right as far as the goals that we should be going after. Next slide. So the I-205 toll project, you see here on the map, it's a 7-mile stretch along I-205. That area is selected because the I-205 toll project is needed to complete funding for the I-205 improvements. So there is a connection there between those two projects. Next slide. And so this project, it's been in its environmental review phase. As you can see here on the screen, you'll kind of your draft environmental review document. So the first time it goes out for kind of its official public comment will be in early spring next year, kind of the March, April timeframe there. And so that'll work itself through that process. Just to note, for those of you who are on JPAC or Metro Council, there will be some regional transportation plan amendment and MTIP amendments coming up here in the next few months. And those are needed to get the toll project and in the description of the I-205 improvements. So like I talked about before, that connection needs to then be made in the regional transportation plan, similarly to kind of how the interstate bridge replacement is described in the RTP as well. Next slide. Again, we're kind of analyzing the impacts of this, and we're going to start to get information out of it. We're definitely working closely with our Clackamas County partners at their coordinating committees, where they group all the cities and other representatives together, but then also doing neighborhood meetings around, as we learn more about diversion and where that's going, we're really trying to get down to those intersections and those specific areas on where that's happening, and getting that feedback and input, not just on the impact, but what should ODOT do to mitigate, but then also to advance equity, to go even further. Next slide. And so this is the alternative that's being studied. There will be 2 toll points, one close to the Tualatin River, and then one on the Abernathy Bridge, or before it. We're still kind of working at that location, but over as you would cross the Willamette River. So that's being studied as the kind of alternative for the I-205 toll project. Next slide. And so finally, I'm going to talk about our Equity and Mobility Advisory Committee. Next slide. So, we've, like I said before, what will those investments in equity mean for ODOT? Where will you see those show up? And one of those major decision makers for that is the Oregon Transportation Commission you see here. So next slide. So this group of wonderful folks, 15 people from throughout the region, very few people in actual government agencies, a high majority, I believe 13 of them, from community organizations or other groups that help represent some of those areas like Ashton had raised before about getting actually out to the community and getting feedback there. So they've been working for about a year now, and they helped us establish that equity framework. They've also been drafting, looking at the research on what should be the preferred policies and strategy options to address those different policy areas. Next slide. And so this is just a timeline of where they've been working on. And we'll send links to some of these meeting materials as well. But they've looked a couple of months at transit and multimodal options. What have tolling projects done for that? Neighborhood health and safety, again, what if congestion pricing projects done to address those elements? They're looked at kind of last month was environmental justice needs and low income impacts. And now these next few months, they're gonna take all their preferred options, what they liked in each one of those, and package that into a recommendation for the Oregon Transportation Commission. Next slide. And so we would love, you know, this isn't the only time we're kind of vetting this information out to the community. We're really using EMAC to lead ODOT, to push ODOT to think about things differently and go beyond. And we really see this as the start of a process to land those commitments. And so the documents I highlight here on the screen, the research and community feedback, the policy and strategy options, but then also the performance measures. What are the detailed pieces that really shape the way the project looks and what information comes out? Those are all excellent documents, and we can kind of send you a one-pager that has links to everything that the committee has worked on. Next slide. And so again, highlighting this as an area for opportunity, and we can start to bring, if you're interested, more in-depth information on this recommendation as it forms to this toll work group, or again, like I said, to that list of briefings or updates or other types of engagement that we do. Next slide. So that is the project update work. Lucinda and Scott, I'll turn it back to you all now.
Great. So I was just kind of going through all the questions, and I realized some of those we kind of just touched on as we did our update. Scott, can you go back to, I wanted to go back. I think there were some questions specifically about some of the slides we had that we could answer. I think Commissioner Nolan, did you ask about the data? It was the data, correct? Yes. So was that data just during peak time, or was that average all day? Can you go back to that slide? It was towards the top.
Oh, for that right there?
Yep.
I'm unsure. I don't know about that. I could look into it and get back though.
And then I think we had one more. Did we have one more question regarding the slide deck? Just trying to keep up with chats.
You see anything there, Nick? Otherwise, after that, Lucinda, Bill has a hand in the air if we
wonderful
chat box.
Go ahead.
There was mention earlier about maybe we don't need to build auxiliary lanes, and we'll just continue with the congestion pricing on 205. And I guess my view of not adding an auxiliary lane, I think this has been brought up before, is that we've doubled our population with no build out in the last 22 years. What is there any kind of percentage of certainty that funding from the tolling with HB 2020 and other sources that we're going to get the build out on 205? Because I think it's going to be a very hard sell to the public to say, we're going to put a tourniquet on your artery in the morning and the evening. So I guess I view it in simple terms, the blood flows slower because we've tightened down your ability to move around through this congestion pricing. And okay, that's my first question. Sorry, I've got one more. And I think for the group, I think you ought to seriously, Scott and the others, consider dynamic pricing. Salt Lake City does it very effectively. And what it does is you get on the freeway in Salt Lake City and all of a sudden your price goes down and traffic adjusts very quickly to those reader boards. And it makes it flow very well. Now, maybe you've looked at all that, but we were there recently and it all moves very, very efficiently. So that's the end of my questions for now. Thank you.
Thank you, Bill. Lucinda, we just have, we're right on 6:45. We've got 10 minutes for public comment. Do we want to take a few more minutes transition there?
Yeah, that's fine.
I appreciate all of the good input and all of your good questions. We will move those on to new agenda items. So if we could advance to the public comment. Okay, next up, we save time for verbal public comment. If you'd like to address the toll work group, please raise your virtual hand. If you're on the phone and want to raise your hand, please use *9. Nick, do we have any raised hands? And incidentally, each speaker will have 2 minutes to speak. We'll have a timer. Please note comments are welcome at any time by emailing region1act@odot.state.or.us. Nick, what have we got?
So I'm looking at the attendees list now, Scott, and nobody has raised their hands quite yet. So maybe we'll just give it another moment or two and see if anybody has a question.
Very good. Just monitoring the chat box and any raised hands to give opportunity for public comments. 2 minutes. This is your opportunity.
And Rob, I see that you've put some comments in the chat box. Did you want to come off mute and talk to the toll work group? I'm going to go ahead and give you permission to talk if you'd like to do that.
Rob says no thanks or is on mute.
No thanks. So no problem. So I think we are good, Scott. No members of the public have raised their hands.
Okay, thanks so much. We'll hold opportunities then to move on the agenda. And Lucinda, we're able to move on to next steps, or if you feel like we need to claw back a couple of minutes, we just put ourselves ahead on the agenda.
Oh, I'd like to claw back a few minutes. I'm sure not everybody has given us their 2 questions. We have a really large group, so if more folks want to come forward with questions, that's great.
And Lucinda,
I'd like to hear those. Yes.
I think I found the question that you were wondering about earlier. Mary not only asked about the data, but also wanted to know about the variable rates and if they were going to be tied to time of day or real-time traffic data.
So they will be, they'll be tied to time of day. So we'll do peak time rates. So there's kind of 2 different schools. There's the dynamic, which I believe we just heard about, that's going on in Utah. And that's on a managed lane. Kind of not easy to do, but definitely different than what we're doing here, which is here's what's going on in the general purpose lanes, and here's your toll rate. Based on how many people are in that lane, in the toll lane, the managed lane, we can change the price. If there's more people, price goes up. If there's less, price goes down. It's happening, what we call dynamic, maybe changing every 5 to 7 minutes. We're tolling all lanes. So to do a dynamic pricing structure would be extremely difficult, if not impossible, because there's no general purpose to fly from. So we're trying to get all lanes through, and we're trying to be consistent to move all congestion or move traffic at a pace. So you can't do that with dynamic pricing with all lanes. So yes, we are doing variably priced. Yes, it will be time of day. Yes, it will be peak time pricing, and yes, we will publish that rate so the public knows what the rate is before they get on the road.
Thank you for that question and your response, Lucinda. I think hopefully that did get at the question. It was good. And I think it's also important that we go ahead and raise hands and hear from folks maybe that didn't ask their top 2 questions. Yes, Mayor Callaway.
Thank you, Scott. And Lucinda, thank you for being present here today as well as earlier today at WCCC. And Scott, I just want to make sure that I highlight that I added my 2 questions to the chat room. And great. So just in being aware of time, I didn't want to take up most of the time with the questions and the answers, but just wanted to make sure that you were aware that I dropped them in the chat box.
Thank you so much. Let's see, hands up. We have Paul.
Yeah, I have a comment and then I have a question to follow on this. So just a little bit of history. Clackamas County was an advocate of resolving the bottleneck on I-205. And the reason we were was because of the safety issues and the diversion issues that are occurring today on local roads and through our local towns. So we have diversion today. It's created problems, but the bigger part of that is that's only during peak hours. So for example, at 10 o'clock at night, or even now, this hour, we don't have diversion and we don't have those safety issues related to diversion, okay? So it just seems somewhat antithetical that we are creating a 24/7 reason for people to divert on our roads, which is the very reason that we chose to advocate to fix this bottleneck in the first place. I really think that, you know, as we grow our economy, as we, you know, and we have grown our economy and our population significantly since really, let's just say the last major highway was built, I-205 and so forth. So it just seems that, you know, we really need to somewhat right size our system and not grow diversion. I think we're creating problems that we don't need to create. So that's my concern. So my question is, you know, people are going to have to, if they don't have alternative forms of transportation near them, behavior change is not an option for a lot of people in Clackamas County. They can't get to where they need to get. So they're going to be paying the toll regardless, and they'll be traveling on the highways regardless. So my question boils down to, what will the revenue sharing be so that we can ensure that we're creating alternatives and transportation improvements to move people as we grow our economy? Even today, we are years behind in right sizing our transportation system and providing all the alternatives. We have very little transit in Clackamas County. So how do we ensure that we're going to get revenue to resolve these very basic problems that other parts of the region don't have, primarily Portland? When it comes to those alternatives, again, that problem that Portland doesn't have is having alternatives to transportation.
And
thank you for that,
Paul, if I can dovetail on that, you know, because we have roughly the 25th largest metro area in the United States, but anywhere between the 8th to 10th most congested metro area in the United States. And so the question is this going to, you know, solve this? And if not, then what?
Very good. I think we've taken care of most of the hands up. Really raised a lot of great questions for our future event agendas that have to do with benefits and diversion, have to do with equity, inclusion, have to do with how revenues are raised and spent and how the toll program works. I think at this point, unless there's one last burning question, we'll turn our attention to next steps. Lucinda?
I think we're good. So just want to say thank you all for coming and being a part of this. It's the first one. I'd like to hear your feedback. We'll be eliciting that as we go through, just to make sure that we're on track and we're getting done things you want to get done. We're going to take the list of all the questions and we'll group them. I think there are some things that go really well together and can dovetail well. So we'll do that. We'll send out the list of what all the questions were, and then we'll send how we want to group them. And then that's what we'll plan for our next agenda, is that we'll come back with, you know, whatever those top 2 ones are that were very similar. and group those together and come back and start talking about those. What we'd like to do is bring you information about, how we came to tolling versus congestion pricing is one of those. I've seen that one out there. That'd be a good one to talk about and dig through. And then toll rates, how that works. Toll revenue, where that goes, how it's determined, how it's spent. And from a really draft high level, because we're not the OTC, but we will be proposing how they go about setting toll rates, so we can share that with everyone. So I think for a first meeting, great questions. They're all burning inside. I think we always have that. I always have that elevator speech in my head. What do I say to people when we're talking about tolls? Mostly when I say that's what I do, I usually have to come up with some great reason why I'm here to do that. So thank you for reminding me again. It needs to get a little bit shorter. Mine is pretty long, so 3 to 5 seconds, it's not, but I'm gonna work on that. So I think all of that is great. And just to bring it back and say, hey, here's where we are, here's what we're looking at, and to have you guys help us shape what we're doing, excellent. So I wanna say thank you for your time. I believe, Roy, we are on time. We're sticking to the being on time. If you have any questions, you can reach out to me or Scott Keeler or Garrett Pryor. All available, all willing to answer any questions. So thank you so much. Really do appreciate your time.
And I just want to add, Lucinda, just a chat that I saw come through. When will the questions be answered? Well, this is the forum. We're setting the agenda, and we'll bring it all back to you. We'll talk again in November. Anything else closing, Garrett, that we missed? Are we ready to sign off? Got one more slide, Nicole.
And
very good.
Roy, do we need to do anything in closing, or are we good?
I will do that. Thank you, Lucinda.
You're welcome. Thank you.
And thank you, Scott.
Yes, thank you.
It's meaningful, good work. I'm not surprised that we have very divergent opinion. When we did tolling before, we saw a lot of different thoughts. It's also interesting that as you move away from a particular project, which you're impacted, you have very different ideas as to the value and what benefits you're receiving. For PS, because I know that she's still there, and others, those of us who are shipping a lot of things through the corridor, we have different ideas. Our large industries are using those corridors to ship products. So they're, with all fairness to Tom Margraf and ODOT, my old good friends there, they're not taking transit. And so they have a very different view of how products are being shipped. For our friends in Hood River, we don't want to have them convert everything over the bridge of the gods because they're trying to get to Seattle. We want them to come through corridors that make sense. So I think there's a lot to discuss in terms of benefits, depending upon who you are. I used to use at JPAC the old analogy: it's a blind man and the elephant. It's either a hose, a trunk, a sidewall. It depends on who you are, where you're at, and so I certainly encourage the group to come up with some succinct sort of benefit elevator speech comments so that the entire region is not divided. We've always been very good about being unified. Our next ACT meeting is October 4th, and it's on a Monday. For those who asked, is there a different night? We went through that process pretty thoroughly when the ACT was first formed. We have Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday meetings all over the place, and nobody likes to go to a meeting on Friday night. Monday we gravitated to it. Ryan, if you and others, we can see if there isn't another date, that would be great. I'm not sure what that would be, but if we can facilitate, I don't think we ask people to join who have conflicts and not try to address those conflicts. I think it's important that we're thoughtful about that. So maybe we can look at that. But October 4th, and then we come back in November. But this has really been great conversation, wonderful questions. People have certainly thought about this and have their own perspective based upon their own location and what they're using that corridor for. Paul, you asked some great questions on the diversion. You and I have talked about this earlier today. We all share those concerns that we're not trying to create a problem bigger than it is today. So we need to be mindful of Clackamas County. And and our friends in Multnomah County and City of Portland, they're having real issues if there's a lot of diversion. So anyway, those are just closing thoughts. It needs to be a thoughtful conversation. So again, thanks to all of us. I told you I would close on time. We didn't do that by 1 minute. So you can take your pound of flesh out of Ryan. It's his fault. So no, I'm teasing. Yeah, no, I'm teasing Ryan. So good evening. Thank you for all attending. We'll see you in a couple of months. And for those on the act, we'll see you on October the 4th. Good night.
Thank you, guys. Thank you. Have a great evening.
Thank you.
Yep. Thanks, everyone.
Buenas noches.
Thank you.
Good night.